Okay, well, thank you for the invitation today, and especially I want to thank NACO for making my book one of the two books for the year. And I'm not unfamiliar with NACO. They were and I guess still are, our landlords at Jensen Rogert, my old lobbying firm. And in fact, my former office as a president of the firm, I still have an office, but it's much smaller. Kent Rogert is the president now and has taken over the front office, but it was Jack Mill's office and then Larry Dix's office for many years. And I had looked forward really to making this presentation at the state convention because I know I would be acquainted with any number of people who would be involved and was kind of looking forward to seeing them. But we're in a pandemic and we make this work as we can, and I'm pleased to do this morning. I've done a couple of lectures on the book since it was published. It's a bit of a challenge for me, frankly, because I know that an audience hasn't invited me to come and read the book to them. By the same token, it is the subject of the presentation. What I think I'd like to do this morning is there's a chronology in the book from 1913 to 2002 on the story of the Nebraska Unicameral, how it came to be, and particularly George Norris's role in it. And I thought I could if I just went through that, and it doesn't take long. So what I'll do is run through the chronology, and then there are three issues or facets of the unicameral that I think deserve a little more discussion or exploration, and they're timely. And so then use some of the remaining time to do that. I got interested in writing the book, by the way, and I believe the introduction says this. If you're a lobbyist, you spend a lot of time just hanging around in the rotunda, waiting for something to happen or your bill to come up for discussion. And one of the truisms that is exchanged between lobbyists and senators and visitors to the State House, and there's a student project video on the legislature's website on this that says George Norris wore out 2 sets of tires traveling Nebraska, selling the citizens on a unicameral legislature. I'm a car nut, have been all my life. I worked nights in a filling station when I was in high school, and that was back in the days of rayon belted bias tires that, if with luck, would last about 20,000 miles. And even at that, I always thought, well, with the roads, the cars, and the tires of 1934, Norris had to he had to live in his car really to get that done. And it just doesn't compute. And in fact, I found in researching the book that scholars have agreed that he traveled about 5,000 miles. He was only out for a month. The month of October, he opened the campaign the evening of October 7th in Hastings to an audience of 700 and concluded it in McCook the night before election, which I believe was November 6th. And I was fortunate in that a master's degree student at the University in 1958 wrote his thesis on Norris's persuasive techniques, and he included in that a schedule of his appearances across the state. And what I was left for me to do was to spend a lot of time in the State Historical Society archives, reading the local newspapers, following Norris around the state. And frankly, it was interesting and it was a lot of fun. If we might talk about that just a bit, but I know I need to get going on this chronology, and I will. And it reads like this, and I'm going to have to have a little help here. 1913, the Nebraska legislature appoints a two-house special committee to study ways to improve state government, which committee offers a resolution for legislative proposal of a unicameral constitutional amendment. The resolution is not passed by the legislature. 1919, State Constitutional Convention fails to place a unicameral constitutional amendment before the voters. January 8th, 1923, George Norris publishes in the New York Times his proposal for, quote, a model state legislature. February 22nd, 1934, Norris addresses a Lincoln gathering of some 800 supporters of a ballot initiative proposing a unicameral legislature for Nebraska, leading to the successful gathering of sufficient signatures to place a proposal on the 1934 general election ballot. December 8, 1934, October 8, 1934, Norris begins a statewide grassroots campaign of some 800 gathering, on behalf of the unicameral constitutional amendment in a 2-hour address before 700 persons in Hastings, Nebraska. November 6, 1934, Election Day, the unicameral amendment carries by a vote of 286,086 to 193,152, a healthy margin, I think anyone would agree. The 1935 session of the Nebraska legislature, the last bicameral legislature in Nebraska's history, adopted a conference committee report establishing a unicameral legislature of 43 members beginning in 1937. 1962, voters approved an amendment increasing from 2 years to 4 years the term of members of the legislature, beginning on a staggered basis in 1964 and 1966. 1965, the legislature, by statute, increases the membership from 43 to 49. 1970, voters approved a constitutional amendment providing for annual sessions of 90 legislative days in odd-numbered years, 60 legislative days in even-numbered years, beginning in 1975, and changing the opening date from the first Tuesday in January to the first Wednesday after the first Monday, so it can never open on New Year's Day. 2000, voters approved a constitutional amendment limiting members of the unicameral to 2 consecutive 4-year terms beginning in 2006. And finally, in 2012, voters defeat a proposed constitutional amendment that would have added a third 4-year term to the time period a state senator is allowed to serve in the Nebraska legislature, and would have also increased the salary, which may have been at least partially responsible for that proposal going down in flames. There were 5 important items in Norris's 1923 op-ed, and they never changed from the time of the op-ed until the adoption on the ballot. And those were, of course, a unicameral legislature, a nonpartisan election. There's a common misconception that the legislature is present, organizing and operating on a nonpartisan basis was part of that amendment, and it was not. That provision actually comes to us in the rules of the legislature that can be changed in any session. So it's pretty widely accepted and quite popular, I believe, but it's not chiseled in constitutional stone. He also proposed a small body. I believe originally he was talking about 25 members. He was talking about and advocated a very substantial salary. I'm not much at math, but I attempted to figure it out one time, and I believe it was about $34,000 a year, which is a long way from the $12,000 that senators are paid presently. He also advocated 4-year terms. The ballot initiative and that came out of that 700 or 800 person meeting in Lincoln on February 26th and 23rd contained what I say are 2.5 of those 5 proposals. But ultimately, if you look at the chronology, Norris got them all, although posthumously, except for the salary issue. And that's one of the things I'd like to discuss in a little bit of depth today. But let's begin with the unicameral itself. And one can imagine the kind of bargaining and discussion to get a plurality out of an 800 member audience for just what would go on the ballot. And I think operative was the fact that Norris was just there for one day, an evening. He was not there for the second day of this convention, needing to get back to Washington. So the measure that was put on the ballot did not specify exactly the term of the legislators, or the number in the body rather, and it did not specify a salary. There's something about numbers that people have trouble coming together on. But Norris got the two things, the one house and the nonpartisan election. And those, I believe, were drop dead issues for him. Researching this can be a little tricky because he very seldom spoke from manuscript. He almost always spoke either from notes or off the cuff. But I'm sure that he would have said no unicameral, no nonpartisan election, no George Norris in this deal. So he got those. Now, so far as the salary and the number in the body, the Constitution of Nebraska and the amendment specifies that the legislature can have a membership of from 25 to 50 members. The ballot provision also authorized an appropriation of $75,000, and that would be biennial, for salaries of the members of the legislature. And I think the expectation was that in splitting that $75,000 among the members of the body, it would work to keep it small. So the salaries would be better. However, in the act, it turned out to be a 43-member body, so certainly it was on the side of the 50 members. So Norris scored actually about 2.5 points of his proposal, and got the rest of it over the years, except for the salary. In doing this book, I set out to find out exactly what Norris did propose. And the knowledge of that, even around the legislature, is not universal, I'll tell you. And then to gauge how we're doing on staying true to Norris's ideals, I interviewed each of the living speakers of the legislature, the present speaker and former speakers, and went through the Norris's 5 principles with them and got their reaction to how we're doing on that. And all of them support Norris's proposal, and all of them were in agreement that the salary is too low, and it is. And the reason, in my view, that that's true is that we want, and we should want, a legislature that roughly mirrors our population, and it doesn't. Because of the economics of serving in it, we have young people who are not yet established, aren't making house payments, certainly sending kids to college, that sort of thing. And then we have old guys, men and women, like myself, who have been successful in business, a profession, a farm ranch operation that they're ready to turn over to the kids and decide to run for the legislature. And they're excellent. They're excellent members of the legislature. I've said, I'll take all of those you want to send me when I was a lobbyist. But the body is not reflective of our population. The middle-aged, middle-income Nebraskan is, as my mother would have said, scarce as hen's teeth in the Nebraska legislature. There's great resistance to increasing the salary, as we've found. Whenever it's opposed, the voters vote it down. One thing that all but one of the former speakers concurred in is A, of course, we need to increase the salary, and B, we need to get it out of the Constitution. Well, that brings up the issue of senators voting themselves a raise, which is the reason that one speaker, a former speaker, was opposed to it. I had an op-ed in the World Herald maybe a year ago proposing that we take it out of the Constitution with a constitutional amendment, and that amendment provide that no salary increase can take effect until 8 years after it has been voted in. So no senator would ever have the opportunity of voting on his or her own salary. They would rather be committing an act of statesmanship, recognizing that the body needs to increase the salary, the state needs to increase the salary, but foregoing any personal profit from that. Nobody jumped on that bandwagon, and the criticism of it is, of course, that it's 8 years out. That's a long time to wait for a salary increase. And my response is, well, 8 years is a lot less than never. We need to address the salary issue. I don't know if it's the lowest in the nation. I attempted to research it, but states peg and pay those salaries in so many different ways. It makes a comparison very difficult. But if it isn't the lowest salary of state legislators in the United States, I believe it's the second or third lowest. I don't think we want to be there. Then the other thing, or another thing that I believe deserves discussion, further discussion, and it's getting it, is the legislature's nonpartisan nature. As I said earlier, many people and people around the legislature believe that it's nonpartisan, being organized on a nonpartisan basis and operating on a nonpartisan basis was part of our unicameral constitutional amendment. It was not. The amendment specified only that candidates for the legislature would run for the legislature on a nonpartisan ballot. And if I recall correctly, specifically forbids any wording or symbols that would allow a candidate to be identified with a particular party. That was Norris's proposal. He wanted to take the parties out of the determination of who gets to run for the legislature as a party organization, who gets to run for the legislature, and what kind of support they would get. The nonpartisan organization of the body, the election of its officers and committee chairman on the floor, that is actually a function of the rules of the legislature. And the rules of the legislature can be changed at almost any time in any session. So if we like it that way, and the evidence is we do, it does deserve our support. And it is an issue, a unicameral issue that has been kicked around increasingly over the past few years. There's now actually an organization that has been founded by a young man in Nebraska to protect the legislature's nonpartisan status, and I wish them well. In talking to the former speakers, they were pretty much of a mind that the openness and a consideration of the legislature and its participativeness is probably more due to its nonpartisan status than it is to its unicameral status. The background of Norris's fascination with a one-house body was he hated the conference committee, which is absolutely necessary in any bicameral legislature. The House passes a bill, the Senate passes its own version of the bill, and then conferees are appointed from each of the two bodies to meet in private, confidentially, and work out the final bill. And that conference report, which becomes the bill, the two bodies, the members of, can only vote one of two ways, up or down. It can no longer be amended, or the process would never end. And so that puts the conference committee in an extremely powerful position. And Norris opined that that is when, quote, jokers, unquote, get involved in the process. And I suspect more than one conference committee did some violence to one or more of Norris's bills also. So that was the background of the one house. In selling it to the state, my dad always told me that at that time, the economy that would be attendant to a one-house legislature, going from the 133 members that made up the House and the Senate in Nebraska to 25 to 50, would save a lot of money. And in the midst of the Depression, that was an important consideration. But that wasn't why Norris proposed it. He proposed it to get rid of the conference committee. And in that regard, there is being heard as we speak, well, not as we speak, but this afternoon, a rule change at the legislature. Throughout my career, so for as long as anybody remembers, members of the press have been entitled to attend, but not report on, the executive sessions of the standing committees of the legislature, which is kind of our version of the conference committee. Very few bills are ever enacted word for word the way they're originally proposed, and they are marked up in an executive session. The public is barred from attending those sessions. The press, however, can attend them, but is not entitled to report on the vote or the discussion. There is being heard this afternoon a rule change which would bar the press from attending those sessions unless the public could attend them as well, which is not a good idea, okay? So, you know, it would appear that the body's openness and Norris's concept, and even though he didn't propose that it be organized on a nonpartisan basis, he certainly would have supported the idea, are under at least a bit of an attack. Now, I've already contacted my senator this morning, and she has agreed she finds that proposal as abhorrent as I do, but it came on fast. I expect it will get a lot of attention, as it should, and my personal hope is that it's shot down and not adopted. The press has, in my 34 years lobbying experience, the press has always been very responsible in the manner in which they handle this privilege of attending the exec sessions. I can just episodically cite some other things that have gone on the last few years that bear very much on the body's nonpartisan status. And one is an event that I've come to call the Day of Long Knives. I retired at midnight, December 31st, 2016. And the legislature that was seated in January of 2017 did indeed elect its leadership But at the end of that day, they had elected only Republicans. All committee chairs, all the leadership positions were occupied by Republicans that year. I don't recall this ever happening before. It hasn't been that long ago that the Nebraska legislature consisted of 24 Democrats and 24 Republicans and Senator Ernie Chambers, who was an independent. Today, the legislature that is meeting in Lincoln, even as we speak, it has a membership of 32 Republicans and 17 Democrats. The person that I asked that question of, because I haven't tracked it this year, gave me the number. He said, except that John McCollister is one of the 32. So you might want to think of it as 31 to 18. And I'd tell that story if Senator McCollister, who's a good friend, were sitting here. The importance of it is, of those numbers in this session, will be that they are cloture proof. Neither body, obviously the Democrats, considerable underdog, can't stop cloture by themselves, but neither can Republicans. And as a lobbyist who has lobbied cloture and achieved it in my career, I can tell you 33 votes isn't enough. When you do cloture, you want to have on the yellow or green card, you want to have identified 34, 35 votes to ensure that you'll have 33. There's always somebody who isn't there, takes a walk, doesn't understand the effect of what they're voting for. So that's the importance of the present breakdown. A couple of things happened to me in the final years of my lobbying career that I had never witnessed before. One had nothing to do with me being a lobbyist. I was on a drive out through the countryside in 2018 and saw a sign, a 4x8 sign that you see sometimes on rural highways on behalf of a legislator's, a would-be legislator's candidacy. And across the top in 6 to 8 inch high letters was the word Republican. And nothing wrong with that. I just never seen it before. I had never seen a yard sign or a highway sign or a billboard for any candidate for the legislature that identified the party, which seems consistent with the fact they're elected on a nonpartisan basis. And then finally, it was kind of a paradigmatic experience. One of my last sessions, I think the next to the last, bill that I had in the legislature for one of my major clients, and had been proposed by a Republican senator and a conservative Republican senator, but he supported the bill, and his concept was not going anywhere. Basically, the calendar was marching on, and my bill remained in committee, and without something extraordinary, it was going to remain there and die there by the end of the session. I went to the committee chairman, who is a Democrat and a known Democrat, and asked what, if anything, could be done to move the bill and have it considered that session. And he very graciously said, I'll tell you what, I've got a bill on the floor that I don't want or need anymore. It's just parked there. I'll give so-and-so that LB number, and he can strip the bill of my provisions and amend it by inserting his language and then get a priority for it, and it can be enacted this session. Well, I was very pleased. I thought this was pretty slick. And so I went back to my introducer and told him that we'd had this breakthrough, and his response was, I don't want to do that. So-and-so is a liberal, and I don't want to be involved with him. That almost took my breath away. I'd never heard anything like that from a member of the legislature. And I think it's symptomatic of an increase in partisanship in the body. On opening day of the present legislature, that Senator Mike Hilgers was elected Speaker without opposition. And that says to me that members of both parties have confidence in Senator Hilgers, Speaker Hilgers' commitment to do business on a fair and equal and nonpartisan basis. And I am acquainted with Senator Hilgers. He came to the legislature after I had retired, but I knew him in his previous campaign and also in the campaign that initially got him there. I have every confidence he'll honor that commitment and will work in that spirit. The other election that day that I thought was certainly interesting and encouraging was that Steve Lathrop of Omaha, a known Democrat, a one-time, briefly, Democrat candidate for governor, was elected chairman of the all-important Judiciary Committee, again, without opposition. That, to me, says that Senator Lathrop and Senator Hilgers' colleagues in both parties have great trust in their intention to operate their respective areas of authority on a nonpartisan basis. I think that you can conclude this by talking about the quote on the front of the Capitol with regard to nonpartisanship, that salvation of the state is watchfulness in the citizen. The next time a candidate for the legislature knocks on your door, and it's just pretty well established these days that nobody gets elected to the unicameral without doing that, ask them about their political party, ask them about their past involvement on the part of their party, and ask them for their personal position on the nonpartisan organization of the body. They'll get the picture and pay attention to it. I think nonpartisanship at the legislature very definitely is worth preserving. When I interviewed former Speaker Greg Adams, he related an incident to me where he was in attendance at a national convention of state legislative speakers. You know, there's an organization for every occupation. And one of the speakers from one of the larger states said to him, Greg, what's going on in Nebraska? What's the deal out there that you guys are so committed to and proud of? And in answering him, Senator Adams said, well, the long and the short of it is that everything you are, we are not. And I think that says a lot if you think about it. We don't elect our leadership or designate our leadership on partisan basis. Any senator can introduce any bill. He does not need his majority or minority leader's permission to do so. His or her position on the bill or any bill is not going to be dictated to him or her on a partisan basis. Our public hearings are announced in advance. Anyone can attend, anyone can testify. And partisanship has nothing to do with any of those things. I think we should keep it that way, my personal position. I hope you agree. And if you do, I think it requires watchfulness in the citizen and spending time with each of the former senators. I'm pleased to tell you that they all would not have missed their service in the legislature for anything. They all enjoyed it immensely. They all unfailingly believe in and advocate our nonpartisan, wide open unicameral legislature. And as do, I think, the bulk of the citizens of Nebraska. And as I believe I close the book, I think it's because of the nature of Norris's proposal. He wasn't born here. He came out here from Ohio to set up a law practice out in south central Nebraska. But when he held up those 5 principles, it's almost like he held up a mirror to Nebraskans. We are open. We are honest. We are sincere. We do cooperate. We do work together to advance our common interests. And that's reflected in the way we legislate as well. I think there really is a Nebraska way, and I think it encompasses the Nebraska Unicameral, which is a unique, the smallest legislature. So Norris got that one too, body in one of the most beautiful government buildings in the world. So it was a pleasure for me to write about it. It's a pleasure to talk about it. And once again, I appreciate your invitation and good luck to all of you.